each year we convene our conference, we find that the interest in Turkey is palpable. This year, again, it's very keen. And it's been a particularly challenging year for Turkey. The country is reeling from terrorist attacks, from the fortunately failed coup, and the military has launched an incursion into Syria just a month ago. Turkey's relations with the West are tense. So our keynote speaker, Mr. Niles Anan, is a leading member of the German parliament, and he's going to provide a first-hand report on the volatile relationships between Turkey and the European Union. You'll hear from him and from many other experts, from Turkey, from Europe, from the United States in the course of the day about these affairs. And I'm delighted that the content of today's program that we have assembled for today, and I'm sure you'll find these discussions very valuable. MEI has the pleasure, once again, of working together to sponsor this conference with the Friedrich Ebert Foundation. They have provided critical expertise and support in making this conference possible. We'd also like to thank MEI board member Jim Holman, who's been extremely supportive of this conference. Again, thank you, Jim. And to Dr. Gönül Toll, who's the director of the Middle East Institute's Center for Turkish Studies, for her leadership. Clearly, there is enormous interest in Turkey in this town, and it's reflected by the many members of the press and the executive branch who are here today to cover this event. MEI, if you happen to miss a panel or two, don't worry. MEI is videotaping the panel discussions today. You'll be able to catch up by going to our website, looking at the video, or a podcast. A note on today's program: Middle East Institute has been around for 70 years. We're celebrating our 70th anniversary this year, and we're very proud that we've conducted all 70 years as an unbiased, nonpartisan institute in our programming and our analysis. And we work hard to ensure that when we assemble these panels, that all voices on the different issues are represented, all voices on the different ideological debate. So, because we want you, the audience, to make up your own mind about controversial issues by hearing all sides. So, in that spirit, once again, we've invited prominent figures affiliated with the different factions within Turkey. Of course, the governing Justice and Development Party, AKP, as well as opposition parties, scholars, and columnists with diverse views. So we're grateful for all of our speakers who will appear today. And now it's my great pleasure to turn over to my friend and colleague, Mr. Michael Meyer, who heads the Ebert Foundation of North America. And Michael will share a few thoughts with you before we begin the first panel discussion. Once again, thank you all for joining us today.
Good morning, everyone. Dear Wendy, dear honorable members of parliaments, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm the head of the Washington office of the Friedrich Ebert Foundation, the largest think and do tank left from the center worldwide, with more than 120 offices around the world. This event today is part of our foreign policy program, which focuses, amongst others, on the Near and Middle East. In cooperation with our offices in the Near Middle East, we discuss regional policies, we organize briefings on the Hill and in the European Parliament and the Bundestag. We support the Turkish-Israeli rapprochement and organize debates on Syria, the refugee crisis, and other topics. You might ask, why is a German foundation supporting this conference in Washington? There are a few reasons for that. Turkey is one of the closest allies in the Middle East for Germany. German-Turkish relations are very old relations, and they are not only foreign policy related, but due to more than 3 million people of Turkish origin living in Germany, every event in Turkey has domestic policy repercussions in Germany. We have a genuine interest to bring Turkey closer to the European Union. The Friedrich-Ebert Foundation believes in peaceful cooperation, support human rights. We promote the consolidation of democratic structures. Because we believe in and help to protect basic freedoms like the freedom of speech, freedom of the press, opinion, and association, we have a huge challenge ahead in our work in and with Turkey. For quite some time, and especially after the failed coup, the situation of civil society organizations, trade unions, the academia, journalists, you name it, has deteriorated tremendously. Despite these odds, we continue our work and hope to contribute to the democratization in Turkey on its way to the European Union. I'm confident that today we can contribute to the peaceful and constructive exchanges of ideas amongst transatlantic partners and wish us fruitful deliberations. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, let me now introduce Gönül, the moderator of the first panel. She is the founding director of the Middle East Institute Center for Turkish Studies. She is also an adjunct professor at George Washington University Institute for Middle East Studies. Previously, she worked at the US office of the Turkish Industry and Business Association, TÜSİAD, and has lectured at the National Defense University. She received her PhD from Florida International University. Gönül, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Michael and Wendy. I would now ask the members of the first panel to join me on the stage. Thank you. Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you all for joining us today. It's wonderful to see such a large crowd. And as Wendy mentioned, there's always a lot of interest in our Turkey conference, and we would like to think that we've become great at this, but I think we also have to give some credit to Turkish politics, which has faced some challenges this summer. At a time when everyone thought that President Erdogan was fully in charge and the Turkish military was emasculated, we have had a military coup on July 15th, and that will certainly have implications for Turkey's domestic politics as well as regional policy. So domestically, that will have implications for Turkey's Kurdish policy, for civil-military relations, and we have a great panel today to address all those issues. And without further ado, I would like to introduce my panelists, although I'm not going to, you already have the book, the program book, so you have their detailed bios, so I'll briefly introduce them. To my left is Dr. Mucahit Bilici. He's an associate professor of sociology at John Jay College at the City University of New York. To his left is Gareth Jenkins, who is a writer and an analyst who has been based in Istanbul since 1989. And he's a non-resident senior fellow with the Silk Road Studies program at the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies, and he's a regular contributor to its bi-weekly Turkey Analyst. To his left is Mr. Garo Paylan. He's a member of the Turkish Grand National Assembly from Istanbul, and he's an economist, and he's also the one of the founding members of the People's Democratic Party, HDP, and has served as a member of the party council and the party's central executive committee for 2 terms. To his left is Ömer Taspinar. He's a professor at National War College and also a non-resident fellow at Brookings. I would like to start with you, Mucahit. For many people, and of course we have to start with the failed coup, for many people, especially here in DC, Gülen movement has been a very moderate Islamic movement that has invested in education and interfaith dialogue. But on July 15th, we have seen that it was something else. So my question to you is, who is a Gülenist? What do they stand for and what is their agenda?
Wow, that's such a direct question. Maybe I should start with who is a Turk or who is an Islamist in Turkey. Well, thank you for organizing this panel, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Can you
Okay. Yeah, so I want to start a little earlier than, Gülen or the coup. Foreign observers have long approached Turkish politics with simplistic cliches, such as the one that juxtaposes liberal, progressive secularists against conservative and traditional Islamism. Such handy templates not only misrepresented the character and reality of Turkish politics, but also forced Turkish political actors to fit in and legitimize themselves with such simplistic categories. Pictures could become reality, only to a certain extent. And today we see a raw reality that tears apart such pictures. So what is new, what is going on? Kemalist secularism was never progressive, as it is well known by now. It was modern only in appearance. Under Kemalist modernity, perceived Western traditions were imposed on, selectively and naively, imposed on Anatolian masses. Kemalist republic was oppression by a secularist minority. And the Kemalist pretense of modernity forced them to allow electoral politics. And Anatolian masses who were religious and who somehow believed always that one day they will wrest power from their oppressors, did so over several decades. And eventually Islam returned as an autonomous identity back into Turkish state. Initially through center-right political parties and later through more explicitly Islamist or pro-Islamist ones. So where are we in this transformation, in this process? Looking at the current landscape of Turkish politics, one inevitably wonders what is going on, really what is going on in Turkey? And we are all asking this question. Well, my take on this question is obviously a conceptual and theoretical one. As a social science person, I'm not a think tanker, I'm sorry to tell you, a room full of policy-oriented folks. So I will try to here offer a conceptual perspective on Turkey, and I hope it will be useful for your own analysis. So I have a few key propositions. What we see in Turkey now is not a new chapter in Turkish politics. Rather, it's a new state with its new politics. In other words, in Turkey, the old state is gone and a new state is established. The religious new majority is founding a new state. I call this new state a religious republic. Indeed, Turkey has transitioned from a Kemalist republic to a religious republic. I must note that this religious republic is a Muslim republic rather than an Islamic republic. Turkey has also been undergoing a process of renationalization, if I may call it so, in the sense of reassembling a new nation, putting together a new national identity. The new nation of the new republic is Muslim nation. In place of Kemalist republic's Turkish nation, now we have religious republic's Muslim nation. No wonder one observes many characteristics of nation building in Turkey. President Erdogan is the new Atatürk. I have called him Abdülhamid III or Ata Dindar, Ata Religious, so the father of religious nation. Depending on the need and convenience, he occupies the structural position of both figures in the minds of Turkish masses, and he skillfully plays both kind of profiles in projecting his politics. Turkey's new nationalism is Muslim nationalism. And for the most part, Islamism in Turkey has always been about Muslim nationalism. Islamism is a secular movement. It's a secular project of nation building, nation conceived as a Muslim nation. Since the rise of AK Party, Turkey has been going through a silent and bloodless revolution, at least up until recently. Religious and nationalist masses of Anatolia fulfilled their dream of taking the state back from the Kemalist minority. And Turkey has been in a civil war, in a civil way, civilized civil war, I must call it. The first chapter of which was the bloodless but plotful and conspiratorial struggle between the religious and the secularists. Religious alliance defeated the secular establishment by both legitimate electoral and illegitimate bureaucratic means. The religious alliance included AK Party, the Gülen movement, liberal and progressive non-religious intellectuals, and some of the Kurds. Once the Kemalist wall that had held captive the multiplicity of religious groups and actors in Turkey was demolished, suddenly two main actors appeared on the stage in the new political field. These were AK Party and Gülen movement, and there was a collision. They were on collision course. There was a clash between the two. The struggle between them, which was recently consummated with a failed coup, was only a second chapter in Turkey's civil war. Question was on whose side the power of the state would concentrate.
So this was a power struggle.
Absolutely, yes. I think everything else is instrumental in that process. Also, with the fall of Kemalist Republic, the axis of politics shifted from religious versus secular to religious versus religious. I call this new politics intra-Islam politics. All Turkish political actors will eventually have to make their peace with Islam. Despite so many opportunities, the party of Kemalist minority, CHP, Republican People's Party, remains a loser and the most miserable party, I must say. As a matter of fact, CHP, with its knee-jerk secularist constituency and its undemocratic culture, has become a ticklish political entity toyed with by President Erdogan. The conflict between Erdogan and Gülen was a conflict over power. This post-revolutionary civil war was a war between two Islamisms, or rather two nationalisms, Turkish nationalism and Muslim nationalism. Gülen represented Turkish nationalism, and Erdogan represents Muslim nationalism. Interestingly enough, Gülen's Turkish nationalism is more pious and spiritual, while Erdogan's Muslim nationalism is more superficial and this worldly. Nevertheless, it was a power struggle. Also, Gülen's bottom-up project of civil and bureaucratic conquest of Turkish state collided with Erdogan's popular yet top-down project of Islamist conquest of Turkish state. So these two allies, which were complementary to each other in the process of defeating the Kemalist establishment, they turned against each other once the common enemy was gone. Gülen wanted access to all state apparatus, including the National Intelligence Agency, MIT. And Erdogan, who was willing to share with Gülen power in most sectors of bureaucracy, realized that by giving MIT, he will be totally defenseless against Gülen. So he turned it into a revolutionary guard and doubled, tripled, multiplied its capacity. And so the war was between Erdogan's forces and Gülen's forces within the Turkish state. Now, put in other terms, Gülen's covert bureaucratic legalism fought against Erdogan's popular political decisionism. Gülen's plan to corner Erdogan with law and legal threats resulted in Erdogan's destruction of the law. So this is, in other terms, a triumph of the political over the legal. So I want to say a few words about the AK Party and the coup. So what is AK Party, really? AK Party, in my opinion, represents Turkey's neoconservative revolution. While Turkey had a silent revolution that took power from the Kemalist minority and gave it to a religious majority, Islamist politics itself had an internal revolution. AK Party represents this neoconservative turn in Turkish Islamist thought. Both the secularists, who were naive in their simplistic Westernism, and the Gülenists, who were sincere in their Turkish nationalism, thus naive, were helpless against intellectual sophistication of AK Party's neoconservatism. The conservative believes in tradition, remains naive with respect to history. The liberal believes in reason and loses tradition. The neocon is smarter and more sophisticated than both the conservative and the liberal. Neocon neither believes in reason nor the tradition so naively. Rather, the neocon historicizes reason and instrumentally uses tradition. The neocon is always a more effective politician and a better follower of Machiavelli. I think both Kemalist-era secularist politics and pre-AK Party conservative politics of Gülen and even Islamist Erbakan were at best naive conservatisms. AK Party introduced a neocon thought and practices into Turkish politics and revolutionized it. So Turkey is no longer your simple, not so smart state, but a strategic actor that now pursues a rational politics of independence and power maximization. Erdogan's plebiscitary dictatorship represents a moment of national self-reassertion in modern Turkish history. The new religious republic entered a new stage of consolidation after the coup, the failed coup in July. And one of the consequences of the coup is that Erdogan is absolutely free from, liberated from the rule of law. He's above the law. And he's seen as such by his constituency. Hence the state of emergency, which is perpetuated through various means and so on. I will say something about HDP maybe later.
Thank you. And Gareth, Mucahit just talked about a new stage in Turkish politics where the cleavage is not between the secularists and the Islamists, and yet the conflict is now within the Islamist camp. What does that mean for civil-military relations in Turkey? You have written extensively on civil-military relations. But maybe before that, I would like to ask, we all knew that the Gülenists have been infiltrating Turkish military, but no one expected them to have a strong presence within the higher echelons of the military. So what would you say about that? And then my next question. And please try to be brief so we can have an interactive session.
I shall be brief. I tend to be very blunt. I'm not going to be any different. What I just heard seemed to me like a recipe for fascism. I found this deeply, deeply disturbing. It's also historically inaccurate to talk about Muslims taking back the Turkish state, the Muslim masses. When did they ever have control of the Turkish state and the Ottoman Empire? The masses never had control. Sure. Turkey is a gloriously diversified society, and the attempted homogenization, whether it's by the Kemalists or whether it's by a particular interpretation of Sunni Islam, and it's not the only interpretation of Sunni Islam in Turkey, as happening now under Erdogan, is going to impoverish the country and it's going to cripple the country. So I found these kind of statements, this advocacy of some form of totalitarianism, deeply, deeply alarming. Coming to the questions, I'll try to be very brief. In terms of the Gülenists penetrating the military, yes, we knew it happened. It began really in the late 1980s, but began to accelerate in the 1990s. Going back a little bit to the first question about what is a Gülenist, I'm sure a lot of you have met Gülen's followers here in Washington, who will tell you they've been appalled by what happened on the 15th of July. Some of them will also tell you that they could have had nothing to do with the many abuses of the rule of law, such as the Ergenekon, the Balyoz case, the spying case, all of these other abuses that we saw conducted by pro-Gülen prosecutors from 2007 onwards. They're probably telling the truth. Within the Gülen movement, you have a hardcore of activists, and you have a lot more people who are sympathetic. Nearly all of the Gülen movement hate me. I'm not saying this to curry favor with anybody. But there is a distinction, I think, between hardcore Gülen activists and also people who are simply sympathizers. What we see in the military, as I said, starting in the 1980s, but particularly through the 1990s, Gulen activists tried to penetrate the military. At the time, there were certain measures in place. The military purged anybody they suspected of being a Gulenist, even just of being a religious Muslim. I used to go and talk to these people who'd been expelled from the military. The vast majority of the people I spoke to clearly weren't Gulenists, clearly weren't particularly religious at all. There are also kind of vetting procedures put in place to try to limit the number of Gulenists who could get into the military. These were only partially successful, but they were successful to a certain degree. Most of these restrictions were lifted from 2002 onwards, partly as a result of Erdogan and the AK Party coming to power, partly because the Chief of Staff from August 2002 to August 2006, Hilmi Özkök, was himself a pious Muslim and was not so worried about religious people joining the military. What this means is the infiltration by the Gulenists accelerated from the late 1990s, but particularly from 2002 onwards. This has repercussions, of course, from the purges we've seen, also has repercussions for the 15th of July coup, because it means that most of the Gulenists were still in the lower echelons of the military. When you look at the CVs of the people at the top of the military, particularly the generals and admirals, since the 15th of July coup, we've had 46% of Turkish generals and admirals have been purged. The vast majority of those entered the military and went through the educational establishments well before the Gulenists were trying to penetrate the military. And so there is a mismatch between what we know of the penetration of the military by the Gulenists, which is kind of bottom-heavy, if you like, and the purges of the military by the AK Party, which have been very much top-heavy. And actually, we still don't know exactly how this coup was carried out. When it comes to the Gulenists, there's smoke, yes there is, but we don't have any fire yet. It's like a jigsaw puzzle and there's still a lot of missing pieces. Doesn't mean that the narrative the Gulenists instigated was necessarily wrong, but we don't yet have any real hard evidence.
So not everyone, the 50% of the generals have been purged, they're not all Gulenists?
Absolutely not,
Okay.
Absolutely not. In terms of what this all means for civil-military relations, I mean, these things have been changing anyway over the last 15 years. Particularly one of the turning points was the Helsinki EU summit in December 1999, where Turkey became a candidacy for EU membership. We've also had changes in the attitudes of the Turkish military, the Turkish officer corps, simply because the world's changed and Turkey has changed. So there was already this shift. I used to spend a lot of time talking to the military in the late 1990s, early 2000s, when the AK Party first came to power. At that time, Erdogan was seriously concerned the military could stage a coup. Talking to some of the people I knew at the time in the military, they said, actually, we don't think we can, but he doesn't know this. And it came to 2007, where this kind of game of bluff was exposed, when the then Chief of Staff, General Yaşar Büyükanıt, threatened to stage a coup. AK Party called an election, got a huge majority, returned to power in July 2007. Buchanan and the military did nothing. That was a really big turning point. We have a lot of these cases I've worked on a lot, like Ergenekon Balyoz. These really were a product of a perception the military was no longer powerful, not the other way around, not the cause. These cases did not take the military out of politics. They're a response to the AK Party, and particularly the Gulenists, realizing the military could no longer assert itself. Their usefulness, such as it was these cases demonstrated to the public that the military is very weak. You look at all of these cases, but I think particularly the Balyoz, the sledgehammer case, and when you have such absurd charges that the military is supposed to have written a plot for a coup in December 2002, which was last saved to a computer in March 2003, using a copy of Microsoft Office 2006, you know there's something wrong. And so many people were then put in prison and the military couldn't get them out. So that demonstrated there that the military was also weak. Since, of course, the 15th of July, we've had some major reforms have been pushed through. We're seeing the abolition of what were called the military high schools. We're also seeing changes to the military academies. We're seeing lifting of restrictions on graduates from Imam Hatip schools, so religious and Islamic schools in Turkey, being able to become officers. We'd already seen a shift since 2006 onwards, where the military began to take in more officers at the entry level, coming from civilian universities rather than going through the military's own system of military high schools and academies. So I think going forward, we're going to see quite a major change in the military ethos. And what we're going to see, what we've seen anyway, to a certain extent over the last 15 years, and it's going to be a very simplistic way of putting it. Whereas, for example, when I first arrived in Turkey in 1989, we had a system of military tutelage, and we had then really the militarization of politics. What we're now going to see is the politicization of the military, where being seen as being ideologically sympathetic to the government, or whichever party happens to be in power, is going to be a key to advancement in the military the same way as it is in the rest of the civilian bureaucracy. In terms of attitudes towards the rest of the world, we're also probably going to see a military which is less well-disposed. And it certainly wasn't ever 100% well-disposed towards the West, but it's going to be even less disposed than it was before. So we're going to get, I think, very major changes, and certainly civilian control of the military. We've seen this even in the incursion into Syria, which actually the military, as soldiers, were very much opposed to. This was Erdogan's decision. He tried to do it in June last year. The military blocked him. Now he has such power that he put Turkey across the border.
And do you think now that the military is weaker after the purges, is another military coup possible?
I never thought that this one was going to succeed. I think one of the most striking things, I'm very skeptical about this narrative that's now coming out from the AK Party, that it was blocked by the heroic people who took to the streets. Less than 3,000 soldiers were put on the streets. It was going to fail anyway. What was very significant was even the people who hated Erdogan, and there are a lot of them in Turkey, as well as the people who love him, even they didn't come out and support the coup. And I think the coup plotters were expecting there would be some kind of traction from the public. This didn't happen. So I don't think there's any possibility of another coup. There is a possibility of an assassination attempt against Erdogan. And much as I criticize him about other things, when he talks and he's very angry about the rest of the world, about how close he thinks he came to losing his life on the 15th of July, I think he has a point. And that risk, that discontentment that is still there, if it comes out into some action, concrete action, it's more likely to be an assassination attempt than it is to be a coup itself.
Garo, military traditionally in Turkey has played almost prevented the peaceful resolution of the Kurdish question. So now that it's in a weaker spot, how do you think that will affect Turkey's Kurdish question? Despite everything that's happened this summer, I still think that the Kurdish question remains one of the thorniest issues in Turkish politics. So what is your sense on where the Turkish peace process is headed?
Thank you very much. Can I start with the Armenian issue? Because it is mostly related with that. I'm an Armenian, and I'm a member of the parliament, and I'm one of the founders of my party, which I'm proud of, HDP. We are all the identities parties. But we have to start from 100 years ago, maybe, to understand what is going on now. Armenians used to be 20% of the population of Turkey's territory. Now we are less than 0.1%. We lived the genocide, we suffered the genocide. And I was born in a house, there was my grandmother, suffered the genocide, having no relatives at all. She was alone. She passed away without living the justice. And as we can all understand, unpunished crimes lead to new crimes. So we suffered that. The Armenians were asking, starting from the 19th century, asking for local democracy. Because in Anatolia, there are different realities. In the Black Sea region, in the, let's say, Southeast, West, everywhere there are different realities. As the Americans or the Europeans can easily understand the local democracy. We were giving that struggle, that democratic struggle, autonomy system we were asking for. And in 1915, in the genocide, the response was very harsh. We lived the genocide, blaming us as terrorist betrayers. Only maybe 1% of the Armenians gave that struggle, but 100% of them were punished. We lived the genocide, and this, unfortunately, as I said, unpunished crimes are leading to new crimes. The demand was decentralization. But after the genocide, we have a very centralized Turkey. We established Turkey in a very centralized ideology. Then, for 100 years, we are living the power struggles. That is it. Whoever gets the power at Ankara, it is the Sultan. Now, Tayyip Erdogan thinks he is the Sultan, he is ruling the country. But as we saw 2 months ago, he was about to fall. He was about to be another power struggle. So centralization and decentralization is the question. We had another coup. There is a coup tradition in Turkey. In every year, we have a coup or coup attempt. So after 1980, let's say, shortly speaking, 2 sociologies were trying to get to Ankara, get to share the power. 2 sociologies. The first one was the conservatives, the Gülenist movement or AKP movement, whatever you say. And in the 90s, we lived coups as well, because the Erdogan government was trying to get the power in Ankara. The response was harsh again from the old status quo, and we lived the coup. And afterwards, we have AKP and Tayyip Erdogan and his friends, which we called the Democrat Muslims, let's say. They were asking Ankara to change. They were asking local democracy. They were offering democracy for everybody, he and his friends. But the more he got power, he got rid of his friends, and there was only Tayyip Erdogan. There were several corruptions that Gülenists showed us, and afterwards he just finished the coalition with the Gülenists. Now he has the new coalition, getting rid of the liberals, Democrats. He has a new coalition with the old status quo, which doesn't want any change. And responding all the demands coming from the sociologies just in a very harsh way, blaming them as terrorists and just putting them in the prison, shutting down the televisions that they shut down yesterday, 15 televisions that the opposition camp had. So we are living very dark days. I want to tell about my party a little bit, if you don't mind. We established our party because there was a pro-Kurdish party, which was BDP. They shut down so many pro-Kurdish parties. We, the Democrats of the Armenians, Kurds, Turks, and all the identities came together, established a party. The main word is the equality. And we are a pro-gender party. We are a gender equality party. In all of our committees, at least it has to be female. At least 50% has to be female. And we are a pro-labor party. And we believe in, we are a pro, of course, local autonomous democratic system party. So those were our demands. Those are romantic demands, as you can understand. But, you know, we are after the coup, and after the coup, we are all out of this position, blaming us as supporting the terrorists. So how did we come to this position? Gülenists didn't want supported the status quo and didn't want the change, didn't want the peace process about the Kurdish issue. And they manipulated several times the peace process, we can say, starting from the Oslo process, and several things happened about the Kurdish conflict. But we were trying to push for the peace process because we, the Armenians, and all the Democrats were taking the advantage of the peace process. There was a democratization. But as I said, after that, corruption cases were shown from this saying, coming from the Gülenists, Erdogan just made a coalition with the old status quo, which doesn't want to change. So that was the coup. That was the coup cloud when came over us, another that dark cloud. So 100 years ago, it was the Armenians suffering. And the same ideology, that centralized, cruel, having no conscience, no ideology is over the Kurds and all the Democrats and all the leftists or whatever you can say over that. Erdogan is blaming everybody who resists against him, and that ideology is as a terrorist. And he says, till the last terrorist dies, I'm going to go with this war. Every day, averagely 30 or 40 people are dying. And when we calculate that those terrorists, it makes about 30 or 40 million people. So he says, I'm going to go for it. So whatever is left from a democracy, let me tell about what is going on in Turkey. He appointed governors instead of chosen mayors. And he said he is going to go on. And he lifted the immunities of almost all the HDP deputies. This is the new Turkey that he is saying. And after the coup, we are living very dark days. So, as I said, 100 years ago, it was the Armenians. That crime was unpunished. Now it is the Kurds again. I have to stop that here, I guess.
Garo, but what is your party's strategy? I mean, you've been, the ruling party has been trying to marginalize the HDP for some time now, and you've been excluded from the national unity efforts in the aftermath of the coup. So what is your party's strategy to, not just to survive, but to revive the peace process?
So, Erdogan is a radical Islamist, as we can understand, because he wanted to be leader of the Sunni world. And Ahmet Davutoğlu, our former prime minister, convinced him that you can be the leader of the Sunni world. So he was to he was friends with the Muslim brothers in Egypt, and he wanted to be leader of the Sunni world in Syria as well. He supported the jihadists there against the regime and against the Kurds as well, of course. But that policy has failed. So Ahmet Davutoğlu is out, and Binali Yıldırım is in. So, but that card has failed. So he has another card, which he believes in, is nationalism. He is a nationalist Turk. So after the coup, what he is offering is to unite the Turkish nationalists. Unfortunately, other two parties, CHP and MHP, is just saying okay to this policy. So only HDP also is out. HDP is trying to be all the identities parties. But, we are out. So, and Kurds are suffering. In my party, whoever suffers, we are more that. I am more Kurdish nowadays. Whenever I suffer as an Armenian, just from about my identity, everybody in my party is an Armenian. So we are more Kurd today. That is what the system, that status quo, or the Tayyip Erdogan takes the advantage of it. Because the majority is the Turk. And he calls this war as an independence war. Against who? Against the Kurds. He says, I am fighting against ISIS. He sent the army to the Syria. No, he's not fighting against ISIS. He just wants the Kurds and all the Syrian democratic forces to not get the power. So, as I said, it is the fight against the Kurds. Like Turkey gave that independence for calling against the Armenians, the Greeks, the Jews, and the Assyrians.
And you think the imprisoned leader of the PKK, Abdullah Öcalan, can he play a role? Does he have...
We haven't heard it had been 2 years almost that we haven't heard from him. 2 weeks ago, his brother to go to the island after a hunger strike. So he just said, this is a blind war. We have to go back to the negotiations. And that is what he said. And every day 30 or 40 people are dying. Even if we fight for 10 more years, the end will be at the table. So we have to negotiate it now. But the response is no. Tayyip Erdogan, I think, is making his last dance with the, as I said, with the old status quo that he has the coalition. And unfortunately, that coalition just wants to unite all the Turkishness. That is a polarization. And if you make people more Turkish nationalists, then you have the nationalist Kurds as well when they suffer. So we, the HDP, my party, is trying to stop that because this polarization have risks. You know, you might have interior war and unstabilized Turkey as well in your hand.
And Omer, I'm going to ask you the toughest question. What is Erdogan's game plan? And how has the failed coup changed his game plan? What is he? Because it all comes down to everything that we're talking about on this panel. I think it all comes down to what Erdogan has in mind.
Thank you all for attending and thanks for inviting me. I think the short answer to your question, Gönül, is in 2 words, imperial presidency. People use the term executive presidency, but I think he has something much bigger than just an executive presidency in mind. It's well known that before the coup, he was well on his way to consolidate power and getting rid of checks and balances, and he could not stand any kind of popularity other than him among politicians. That's why he forced Davutoglu to resign, and he wanted to be perceived by the media, by the civil society, by everyone in the world as the only leader of Turkey. Now, the dilemma for Erdogan is that the presidential system is not very popular in the eyes of the Turkish public. When you look at opinion polls, the people who support the presidential system in Turkey are around 35 to 40%. So you have a strong bloc that doesn't want more presidentialism in Turkey, which is a good sign because all the solutions in Turkey require a better democracy, stronger checks and balances, better governance, rule of law, and decentralization, not more centralization of power. On the other hand, he wants to centralize power, and he wants, as I said, a presidential system that is different than the one in France or than the one in the United States, which has strong checks and balances. The problem that I have on this panel is that I agree with all the things that has been said, but we don't have an AKP voice to basically, on this panel, we will have Volkan Bozkır in the afternoon who will probably give us a more pro-AKP. I mean, he was a member of AKP, and he's still a member of AKP, and he was minister, so he will defend probably his party. But I'm trying to think about the elephant in the room here. And the elephant in the room is the ongoing popularity of Erdogan in Turkey. When you look at opinion polls, 70% of Turks support him. 70%. That's a very high number, and it has increased after the failed coup. So people support Erdogan, people love Erdogan, people see him as the only leader capable of solving problems in Turkey, yet they don't support a presidential system. So that's Erdogan's dilemma. How can he surpass this? And I'll try to explain what's going on in Turkey in a more charitable and slightly more benign way, trying to voice maybe the kind of how an AKP person on this panel may defend basically his party or her party and the agenda of Erdogan. And I think Erdogan or his supporters would say, well, the reason why people support us, the main reason of our popularity is because basically we represent Turkey. We represent these new dynamics in Turkey. There is a nationalist realignment in Turkey right now. Erdogan's party has, with the end of the Kurdish peace process, converged with the MHP. So you have an MHP nationalist and AKP more conservative nationalist bloc that has been formed. And that's basically potentially 65% of Turkey. Against that, you have a weak opposition. And they would probably blame some of the problems of Turkey, the AKP people, on the weakness of the opposition, which is quite opportunistic because they do their best to keep the opposition weak in terms of controlling the media, controlling freedom of speech, controlling freedom of association. But what is happening in Turkey, in my opinion, with this realignment of nationalism is what I sometimes call a Gaullist moment in Turkey. Think of Erdogan as Charles de Gaulle in France. He's basically willing to create a new republic, like the way Charles de Gaulle created in France the Fifth Republic. And the constitution of the Fifth Republic in France was tailor-made for Charles de Gaulle, which has created, in fact, an imperial presidency in France. How many of you know the name of the Prime Minister of France? You barely probably know the name of the president these days, but François Hollande is known. Jacques Chirac was known. François Mitterrand was known. But the Prime Minister was nobody in France. So that's the system that he has in mind, a system where basically he changes the constitution, establishes a kind of imperial presidency, and establishes a Gaullist ideology in Turkey. That's what I meant by being more benign, more charitable. We can call what's happening in Turkey proto-fascism, totalitarianism, authoritarianism. It has elements of that. But the problem is that it has, as some of these regimes do, a strong popular support as well. And so what he's trying to do is to capitalize on four major feelings which resonate in Turkish society with the majority of the people. And ironically, these four concepts resonate also with the Kemalists. So what we have is not only a convergence between the MHP and AKP, but also neo-Kemalist, nationalist, secularist elements of old Turkey, which is sometimes called Ulusalcılar, which are also converging on this new Gaullist moment of Turkey. So these four major concepts are the independence of Turkey. Independence is very important for Erdogan. And independence traditionally has been very important for Kemalists. Independence from the international system, independence from the West, that Turkey should be, in a way, almost non-aligned, that Turkey should be the voice of the independent world. So the second one is sovereignty, the sovereignty of Turkey, a very sovereign republic and a centralized sovereignty. The third one is very dear to Erdogan's heart and also Gaullism, grandeur, a sense of Turkish grandeur, that this is not just the secular republic of Ataturk, but this is an imperial republic. This is neo-Ottomanism in a way, the imperial grandeur of Turkey, the power of Turkey. This was very visible in the agenda of Davutoğlu and neo-Ottomanism, but it is still there. And grandeur is something that I think Erdogan aspires to on the world stage. He wants to be a respected leader. And Gaullism was also about grandeur. It was also about independence. It was also about sovereignty. And finally, the most important one, nationalism. I can't emphasize enough the nationalism dimension. Look at the way the Gülen movement is portrayed by Erdogan. It is portrayed as a foreign agent. It is portrayed as a Western movement. Look at the way he portrays the Kurds. The Kurds are supported by the United States. These are external factors, external enemies, imperialist forces. So there is a sense of basically uniting Turkey against the Gülenists, which are now the terrorists, against the PKK, which are the old terrorists, always been the terrorists in his eyes, and the separatist Kurds. And then, of course, the West is supporting both of those. The West is supportive of Fethullah Gülen, the West is supportive of the PKK, and Turkey is the main victim here. No one understands Turkey. We don't get respect, we don't get understanding, we're the victims. And he builds on these feelings, and he establishes, I think, a narrative that resonates with the majority of the Turks. And I would like to conclude with the main reason why Erdogan remains popular. And we would hear it today from an AKP official if someone was here representing the AKP. It's the economy. The services that AKP is able to provide, despite the decline in the growth rate, the fact that the new Turkey that Erdogan has created compared to the old Turkey of the 1980s and 1990s has much better infrastructure. People get tired of hearing about better roads, better infrastructure, better schools, better healthcare system, better all the things that municipalities, social services are able to provide. But that's key. if you have a major economic crisis in Turkey, similar to 2001, when we had a bankruptcy of the financial sector and basically a major crush of the economy, I think that would really hurt Erdogan's popularity. And the economy is key to his executive imperial presidency agenda, and that's why he has total control over the central bank now. And the main driver of the Turkish economy is no longer foreign direct investment, is no longer really productivity. This is not a productive, export-oriented, very efficient economy anymore. It's an economy based on patronage and clientelism, driven mainly by the construction sector. And there are similarities in that sense with basically a system where you have a crony capitalism, a soft corruption, and large construction conglomerates, which are basically very much in the business of providing jobs, services, and keeping this system of rentier state based on construction, fueled by a new mortgage system and low interest rates, alive. That may sound familiar to some of you. That was 2006 United States. So maybe there will be a crash of the housing sector. Maybe that would basically change certain dynamics. I'm a strong believer in economic dynamics, and Erdogan has so far not witnessed a major economic crisis in Turkey. Even in 2009, after the aftermath of the global financial crisis, the Turkish economy managed to recover relatively fast. And this is why we have to pay attention to the economy, and if Erdogan manages a certain level of growth and the economy continues to muddle through low interest rates, the construction sector, I think the road is wide open for him to establish his imperial presidency with a Gaullist agenda. And in that sense, I think that's a more charitable, more benign way of looking at what's going on in Turkey, but the implications for the Turkish democracy are still very dire.
Well, that was a very depressing picture. So the good news is that there is a brake mechanism.
I did my best.
There is a brake mechanism here, but the bad news is the brake mechanism is an economic meltdown. Well, before we turn to the audience, would any of you like to react to what other panelists said? Very briefly, please.
Only Mr. Taspinar said 70% is supporting the Erdogan. Now, 2 years ago, due to the polls, 78 or 80% were supporting the peace process. Nowadays, they say 70% is supporting Erdogan's policies in a nationalist way, just stopping the peace process, going for the war. This is it. But Erdogan is an opportunist. And he just can convince his sociology to the war or to the peace. But he lost some votes when he was, when the peace process was on the table. And when he did the war, he is gaining votes, some support. 70% doesn't mean the votes, that's support to his policies. So he could be the leader to make Turkey a democratic country. He could be, really, we had a chance. But he, as I said, he's an opportunist. He just turned back to, just finish the peace process and go back to the war. So Turks are educated for 3 or 4 generations in a very nationalist system. And it is easy to make them really just supporting the nationalist policies, so easy. But to really establish a peace is so hard. That is how we know. And HDP really give a huge struggle to make that peace wall brick by brick. But as I said, so in a year or in a month, a bad cloud came and bad guy or whatever came and just that hit that wall easily and demolished everything so easily. So we are again living the 1940s, 1914s Ottoman days or 1930s Germany. And Hitler, of course, got very endorsed their sociology easily. The nationalist agenda is easily to go for it. But Erdogan is, as you said, old Turkey, now is a hostage of the old Turkey.
Gareth, you have
Okay.
something to add?
Just something to pick up a little bit on what Omer said, particularly in regard to why Erdogan's popular. Of course, he has almost total control over the media. Foreigners tend to focus very much on when people are persecuted for what they've written. I think a lot more pernicious at the moment is the control of over what goes out into the public domain. I'll give you two very quick examples. I was on the Bosphorus Bridge on the night of 15th of July when it was being closed, crossing from the European side to the Asian side where I lived. The kids, and they were very, very young, who were charged with closing the bridge, obviously had no idea what they were doing. They were as innocent of wrongdoing as anybody else. One Erdogan's hardcore supporters, and one of the most disturbing things we've seen recently, is that these people now believe that they are responsible for protecting Erdogan, not the forces of law enforcement. They lynched some of these kids. Some were thrown into the Bosphorus from the bridge, others were knifed. Another example, I was in the southeast, in Nusaybin, Cizre, and Şırnak at the beginning of this month. The PKK took the war into the cities in the middle of last year. They knew damn well what they were doing, that if they took the war into the cities, women and children and non-combatants were going to get killed. And the Turkish state duly obliged by killing a lot of civilians. You look at areas of Cizre and Nusaybin have been flattened. Şırnak has been under 24-hour curfew since the middle of March. The majority of the city there has also been flattened. Look the coverage of this in the Turkish media and you see nothing. So when you look at freedom of expression, you look at reasons for Erdogan's popularity, it's not just the authoritarianism, it's the control of what people know about. And I think this is something which is largely being ignored and neglected.
Thank you. Mucahit, very briefly, you have one
Yeah, I would
minute.
like to briefly respond to some of Gareth's objections earlier. He took issue with the masses taking back the Turkish state. Well, that's the subjective perception of the constituency of AK Party people, and the whole discourse of neo-Ottomanism has to do with that. The idea that Republican era was a bracket in the longer history of Turkish nation, and it's to be overcome and so on. So it's not, a matter of objective observation. It's a subjective perception by the people. Secondly, to say that military is going to be or is becoming political under Erdogan, well, military was always ideological and political. Now the ideology is being reversed. It's becoming visible to us who have been socialized into a kind of secular establishment reading of realities. Finally, Erdogan is not a radical Islamist, I would say. At best he's a pragmatic Islamist, but really he's a Muslim nationalist. Erdogan is a Muslim nationalist. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And now I would like to open the floor for questions from the audience. Please wait for the mics. We'll take a couple questions and identify yourselves. And please try to be brief. Okay, the gentleman over there. Gentleman over there, and there is one in the back. Yes.
Thank you very much for your talk. I really enjoyed that. I was a professor at Tehran University. They purged me, although I was Muslim. I am not Islamist. I am, let's say, patriotic Muslim. So I understand a part what you're doing. With that background that I have over there, I see Turkey, like Iran 30 years ago, is entering the transitional period. And at this transitional period, everybody is confused. So populism is there. War, everybody against others. So I see a sense of hatred and a sense of, let's say, sensationalism there. Is that really the case? And is there any philosophy, something that, okay, you go beyond this, understand that, what I say. When you say Muslim nationalist or Islamist, is Islam Islamism? Can we have that? Or no, we can be Muslim, but we can be patriotic, we can be Kurd, but we can nation. You cannot say the Kurdish nationalism. Nationalism is nation state, but ethnicity or religion is not ism. That is, would you just elaborate on this, please? Thank you.
Thank you. And there is another question over there, the gentleman over there.
Peter Humphrey, Intel analyst and a former diplomat. I'm thinking that the establishment of a Kurdish state in northern Iraq and northeast Syria would serve Turkey's interests because it would be an escape valve for the pressure of Kurdish self-determination. Does Turkey actually believe that it can put the Kurds back into the bottle after they've done so much of the heavy lifting against Daesh?
Thank you. And there's another gentleman over there.
Thank you. My name is Aydan Karamanoğlu. I'm first counselor at the Turkish Embassy. Well, we had again a very peculiar way of presenting Turkey. It seems that we are the failed state of the Middle East. But
Turkey is a peculiar country.
but I want to ask two questions. One, first of all, it has been many adjectives have been used to qualify President Erdogan. He's a Muslim nationalist. He is making an alliance with the statu quo. He's a nationalist. He is a revolutionary. He is making a revolution. I get confused. I mean, I think that the panel doesn't really know how to characterize the president. But beyond that, nobody has talked that 241 Turkish citizens have died during the coup attempt. 2,000 of them have been injured. We went 100 years back, but it happened 2 months ago. And this has no repercussion on the Turkish politics? First question. Second question, I'm happy that Gönül has mentioned the name PKK, because nobody has talked about PKK. PKK is killing people every day. Every week, it's killing Turkish citizens. And the hand that you were talking about that took down the wall that you so-called built was maybe the PKK's hand. They ended the ceasefire. So nobody has really talked about the PKK. So my question is this: when the PKK will lay down the arms and stop killing people, and then maybe we'll have a process. Thank you.
Thank you. So who would like to take the first question?
Obviously, Islam and Islamism are not the same thing. Islamism is a modern secular movement. As I said, it's an identity-based movement. Islam is a religion.
Can you speak up?
And therefore, we cannot equate the two. In terms of comparison between Iran and Turkey, Erdogan's politics is politics of charisma. It's a transitional thing. It is beyond reason. It's based on emotions and so on, and he's a master politician. So, yeah.
Okay. Just very briefly on, I think it's a fair point that I live in Istanbul, and the events of 15th of July were a trauma for a lot of people in Istanbul and Ankara. Not only the actual fighting, but we had F-16s buzzing us, making our buildings shake. I think that's still not fully understood outside. That's no excuse, of course, for what happened afterwards, and I would still argue very strongly that what Erdogan should have done on that night, instead of calling his supporters out onto the streets, is to leave the loyal security forces who have the equipment, who have the training, to deal with what was essentially a multiple terrorist attack. I don't think all those people needed to have died, though it was a great tragedy. On the PKK and the Kurdish, what the so-called peace process, I've always hesitated to call it a peace process, which happened from 2013 to 2015. For me, it was always a preliminary to a peace process. But if you look at what happened, it was the third of 3 such processes. Each time the Turkish state engaged with the PKK, what kind of message are you then sending to people, for example, who engage in the political process, to young Kurds? If you want to be taken seriously, kill somebody. If you don't want to talk to the PKK, because it's an illegal organization and is a brutal one, then you can at least talk to the elected members of your own parliament. And this, I think, is something which is sending a very, very dangerous message to the Kurds. What we've also seen over the last year, actually these talks were abrogated by Erdogan himself in March 2015. The PKK returned to violence in late July 2015, sometime later. But what we've seen over the last year is, I mentioned previously about the lack of media coverage of what's happening in the southeast. Many of the Kurds in the southeast support the PKK, it's a reality. Also, others don't. But both feel abandoned at the moment. Those who talk to Kurds who actually were sympathetic to the AK Party always stood against the PKK. And then they say, look, we've always been against the PKK. We're suffering. We've had the centers of our city devastated by the fighting. Where's the Turkish state? The Turkish state's wearing a uniform and it's stuck behind fortresses around the security checkpoints and around the police stations. What this is doing is alienating the Kurds as a whole and pushing them further and further away from Ankara. And rather than talking about whether or not to restart a process with the PKK, there are a lot of other actors in Turkish society with which a process could be started.
The Syrian Kurds, represented by PYD, doesn't want to establish a state. Wants an autonomous local democracy. That is what their demand is. And we offer this process for all over Middle East, not only for Syrian Kurds, all over Turkey, not only for the Kurds, of course.
Garo, I think he was talking about the Iraqi Kurds, not the Syrian Kurds.
Okay, but I can't speak about the Iraqi Kurds, of course. So PKK is a result of the 1980 coups, policies. As I always say, you can easily make people as terrorists, as you can mention. Colombia had an agreement with the FARC guerrillas after 50 years. If you were to say, let's say, 90s words, then in the 90s, Turkey, until the last terrorist dies, we are going to go for it. It didn't work. And to do the same things and expecting for the different results, as what Einstein said, is the false thing. So we offer that we have to go back to the negotiations and the peace process. But as you said, the ones who manipulated the peace process are now sentenced to be the actors of the coup now, as you know. As we all know, that who bombed that 34 young Kurds in Rojava or the other cities are now sentenced to be the actors of the coup. So there are always manipulators in Turkey about the peace process, about that old state, or that they know how to manipulate the peace processes, as we all know. So there are manipulators now as well. So if we then don't get rid of those manipulators, we will leave several coup attempts in the following years of Turkey that I'm very sorry.
I'll try to answer the question of our friend from the Turkish embassy. I think, it's a difficult thing these days to be a Turkish diplomat, but you, I think, heard from him exactly what I meant by victimhood. Turkey doesn't feel that it's being understood. Turkey feels that the West is biased. Turkey feels that there are all these enemies out there. They basically have an agenda and they don't get Turkey. They have malign intent, and Turkey is the victim here. So this narrative of victimhood, which you could sense in his question, is very much real in Turkey. The second thing that he did well is basically ask a question about why there is no agreement here about what Erdogan is. He seems puzzled by the fact that we disagree. Well, that also reflects Erdogan. He wants agreement. He wants uniformity. He wants one voice. And he wants basically a Turkey where basically everyone agrees. And there has to be a definition of who he is, and he's a Democrat. He represents Turkey. Well, welcome to Washington, D.C. A panel may disagree on how to define who Erdogan is, and that's the reality of a pluralistic world where there is free debate.
Sorry, one final word from Mucahit on the PKK.
Yeah, I would like to say something about PKK. I think PKK, Gülen movement, and even Erdoganism are the abused children of Kemalist system, and they are all authoritarian. And the destruction of Kurdish towns in southeast Turkey, Turkish Kurdistan, as much as Turkish state is responsible, I think PKK has greater responsibility in that. The PKK invited Turkish state to destroy those towns. And PKK also blocked the hopes that were associated with Mr. Paylan's party as a kind of democratizing, liberalizing movement within Kurdish politics. So I agree, we should mention PKK and give it its due credit in the destruction.
Amberin, and there's another lady over there, another one in the very back. So please, can you bring the mic?
is Amber Zaman. I'm a Turkish journalist and a public policy fellow at the Wilson Center. And my question is for Gareth. And I apologize if you already addressed this in your speech. I missed your comments. How would you characterize the dominant ideology of the Turkish armed forces in the wake of this coup? And do you agree with the contention that the Turkish armed forces are far weaker politically as a result of it? But then we see Erdogan kowtowing to them more than ever before, which seems to contradict that notion. And if so, how much pressure can the armed forces bring to bear on Erdogan if he decided to move forward with the peace process again? Would they be opposed or in favor?
Thank you. The lady there.
Hello, Sharon Bovat, Voice of a Moderate. First, I'd like to say that when you look at the coup and what happened, what we saw at the Middle East Institute at the National Press Club with bloggers about a year ago being executed with the people cheering on in Turkey. And we've seen tourism continue, and we've seen this coup, and we know that if Gulen was involved, they would have taken over the communications tower properly. I think what people are failing to recognize is that really this coup is showing that people have a fear of Erdogan, and the American public now is responding by not wanting to support NATO because we see ISIS fighters traveling through Turkey. And I think the big picture really is that we need economic sanctions. What current push is there to stop tourism, have economic sanctions so we can get this resolved quickly and maybe to save some lives?
Another question? Yes.
I'm Sarah Battal. I'm a graduate student at Columbia University, and my question is for Mr. Omer Taspinar. So in your speech, you highlighted the importance of the construction sector in Turkey's economy and its contribution to Erdogan's rule. But we saw that just a few weeks ago, Mucahit, one of the larger construction firms in Turkey, was taken over by the government and its owners put into prison. So what do you think about the intersection of the Gülen moment and the construction sector in Turkey, and what are the implications of that in the future of Turkey's economy? Thank you very much.
Gareth, would you like to start?
Actually, I did touch on this when I spoke. I mean, the ideology of the Turkish military has been changing, as I said earlier. At the time of the coup, I saw quite a few articles talking about factions in the Turkish military, that some people were looking more to Eurasia, some people more to NATO, some people more to the Middle East, some to just Turkey being completely independent of any international alignment. I think it's wrong to talk of factions, but it's certainly a lot more diversity in ideology in the Turkish military now than there was, for example, 20 years ago. But they haven't really kind of solidified into distinct factions. And as I said earlier, this is going to continue to change. There's actually a very interesting survey which hasn't been published yet, which hopefully the author will publish next year, which shows how there's also a difference in ideology when you look at the ranks in the Turkish military, which actually means a difference in the ages. Whereas the younger ranks are a lot less likely to be looking towards the West than the ones who are towards the top of the military. In terms of Erdogan kowtowing to the military, I don't think this is true. I think when you look at the Kurdish issue, this is the two coming together. The Turkish military has always been very hardline on the Kurdish issue. Erdogan has as well. And so you get this kind of confluence of interest. One of the interesting things about traveling around in the southeast as much as one can with all the roadblocks and everything else is that there's been a marked shift now in terms of the profile of the Turkish military. Nearly all of the roadblocks are manned by elements of the police rather than Turkish military or the gendarmerie. I was in Sur, in Diyarbakir in January when the fighting was going on. It was also significant then that so much of the fighting was actually done by elements with the Turkish police. So as well as this confluence, we're seeing a shift also in terms of the fighting against the PKK. But Erdogan now has total control over the military. We have a lot of questions to be asked about the Chief of Staff, Akar, and what actually happened to him and his role on the 15th of July, which these questions are not being answered. But at the moment, he is doing absolutely everything Erdogan tells him to do.
If I may, Amir, and on your question as well about the military, I think the main ideology now of the Turkish military is a kind of Kemalism that has very strong neo-nationalist, Ulusalcı, Eurasianist elements in it. The profile of officers who have upward mobility now is a profile of officers who did not have that much training in NATO countries, in the United States. And there's definitely a kind of anti-American, anti-Western streak, I think, in the new ethos, esprit de corps of the military. And they're very subservient to Erdogan. Erdogan is now the Başkomutan, the commander-in-chief, and he basically gives orders. And it's very telling, as Garo and Gareth mentioned, that before 15th of July, there was resistance from the military about this incursion to Syria. Somehow, miraculously, after 15th of July, the resistance is gone. And Hulusi Akar, the chief of staff, and all the top brass are basically trying very hard to be on the good side of Erdogan and basically no longer challenge him. So if there was a modicum of independence, resistance to Erdogan coming from the military, in post-July 15 Turkey, the military is no longer an actor, it's totally subservient to Erdogan. Some may argue this is how it should be in a democracy, but you would expect at least from generals to express their professional opinion about whether an incursion to Syria is the right thing to do unilaterally in the absence of multilateralism, a United Nations decision, or some support from stronger support from NATO, which were the objections before 15th of July. Construction sector question. I don't think the Gülenist economic empire was very big in the construction sector. The construction sector has been more the realm of AKP and larger conglomerates. So the Tuskon, for instance, which was the economic wing of the Gülen movement, it was more composed of export-oriented small and medium-sized merchants. And there were elements, there were some few larger construction companies, especially in central Anatolia, like Kayseri. But I don't think the purge of Gülenists in the private sector will really impact the construction sector in Turkey.
Okay, the lady here, the gentleman here, and stake, and there's another question in the very back here. Sorry, first to the lady.
Lori Milroy, Kurdistan.
That's fine, please.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Order, and I'm wondering how things are different today than they were during the time of the Clinton White House. I delivered a letter from Öcalan's hands to the president calling for a unilateral ceasefire, was never acted on. I'm shocked that Turkey has such a strong reaction to Americans. We want to be helpful. Things haven't changed. And I'm terrified that as Erdogan continues, he might have someone very much like him assuming the presidency of the United States, and we should all be terrified.
So your question is about Turkey-U.S. relations, how different Turkey-U.S. Okay. The gentleman here, please.
My name is Albert Fairchild. I'm a retired Foreign Service officer. I'd like to ask a question about the AK party. My impression to date, the one which has been reinforced by this panel, is that it's a monolith, totally subservient to Mr. Erdogan. Are there no factions, there are no nuances within the AK party? Are the leaders of the AK party, that is the second level leaders, totally behind Erdogan? Are they waiting for a moment? And basically, I guess, leading to, is there enough there to survive Erdogan? Because he, like all politicians, eventually must go. What will be left? Thank you.
Sorry, I apologize, I'll get back to you, but there's another question right here.
Hello, this is picking up on the idea of
Please
victim.
identify yourself.
Oh, my name's Dorothy Marshak, and I have no official right to ask a question. I'm just. You mentioned the use of victimhood argument, and you also referred to some analogies, imperfect, to Hitler. And I'm just wondering, in this victimhood thing, is Erdogan doing what Hitler did and talking about the stab in the back? In other words, that they were betrayed during the Treaty of Sevres, and you know, in connection with the Ottomanism about restoring that. Is that part of the argument that's being used?
Who would like to go first? I have a question back here. One more. Kurdistan 24, Lori Milroy. I'd like to ask the panel how they see the likely outcomes of the fighting in Syria with the YPG essentially controlling all the territory from the Iraqi border to the Euphrates. And does Erdogan have plans for somehow taking that territory from the YPG, or is the fighting in Syria likely to end with the YPG in control of that area?
Just very quickly on whether the AK Party is a monolith. No, it isn't. What we've seen, even though Turkey has supposedly always been a democracy, when you look at the choosing of candidates for elections, it manifestly isn't. The candidates for the different parties tend to be chosen, HDP is an exception, but all the other parties tend to have the leader choose the candidates. So if you look at for example, the AK Party parliamentary party at the moment, it's completely dominated by Erdogan loyalists. But if you look at the broader AK Party, there are lots of people, including actually on the conservative wing of the party, who are deeply disturbed by Erdogan's authoritarianism. But everybody's waiting for somebody else to make the first move. This goes back several years. For example, in the run-up to the local elections in March 2014, when there was a lot of debate about whether then President Abdullah, who's not actually a fan of Erdogan, was going to try to challenge him. And some of the dissidents in the AK Party went to Abdullah Gül and said, why don't you stand up against Erdogan and we'll support you? And Gül said to them, no, you stand up against Erdogan and I'll support you. And it's still very much that situation in Turkey, that everybody's waiting for somebody else to put their head above the parapet first. But there is a lot of discontent inside the broader AK Party. But very briefly on kind of history and the stab in the back. Erdogan yesterday attacked the Treaty of Lausanne and basically said, I mean, the narrative about the Gülenists being behind the 15th of July coup attempt has a subtext in the sense that it's very common to then hear AK Party supporters and AK Party officials talk about dark forces being behind the Gülenists, which basically means the United States. And Erdogan yesterday came out with this rewriting of history in which the 15th of July coup attempt was yet another attempt by these dark forces, which means the West, means the non-Muslims, means the Christians, to try to destroy Turkey. So that rewriting of history in the same way as Hitler rewrote the history of the First World War, we now have Erdogan also rewriting the history of the First World War from a Turkish perspective.
In the 1990s, we were living really very dark days. But from the West, really criticism were coming from the West, from Europe and from the States as well. But now, let's say, Merkel is just only caring about the refugees, not at all, not criticizing, and has a blind eye on the human rights violations in Turkey. And what about the States? Of course, there were criticisms coming from the States, especially from Mr. Biden. He came 3 times in a year. In the first 2, he criticized the human rights violations. But Erdogan made another game with Putin. He made the Putin and he said, I'm sorry about that plane. And the other day, Putin was in Ankara. And he said no words about the human rights violations and shook his hand with showing 32 of his teeth. And that was really, I'm sorry, very sorry about it, because I always ask, like 100 years ago, there were Americans in Anatolia, the British, the French, people from this from everywhere. The people were in Anatolia, all watched the genocide. Now it is the Kurds, and the world is watching. Not only the Kurds, the leftists, everybody are suffering. 100,000 offices are dismissed. Not only the Gülenists, not only the Kurds, all the leftists who have even a bank account in Bank Asya, having 10 liras there, are dismissed without a court decision. So, why I'm giving so similarity? Like we had the Reichstag, in Germany. Afterwards, he got rid of not only communists, everybody who resisted Hitler. Now we have who will stop this consolidated power? As you know, we have to have checks and balances system. But in Turkey, it's over. We have no checks and balances system. We have no rule of law, no media. He just shut down the last televisions and radios and newspapers yesterday, and nobody is to criticize Erdogan in Turkey. The parliament is over. We have the emergency law. So who is the criticize or stop the Erdogan? There is no carrot coming from the West offering, if you go for democracy, you're going to have this. And there is no stick. Just if you don't do that, you can leave this, of course. As I said, Erdogan is an opportunist. He just looks to the conditions, if it is suitable or not. Any criticism is coming from inside Turkey or outside Turkey. So where are the values of the West? I'm really asking again.
Thank you.
Again, from this panel's discussion, you get a very gloomy picture about Turkey, which is probably deserved. But let's not forget that despite all its imperfections, Turkey is still the most successful state in the Middle East. You have to look at the state of the Middle East to understand basically this situation. But Turkey used to compare itself with Europe. That's the problem. Turkey used to compare itself with the Mediterranean European countries, Greece, Portugal, Spain, and the level of democracy in Turkey, unfortunately, has backtracked. That's why you get this sense of gloom and doom about this panel. But if you compare Turkey with the rest of the Islamic world, the first thing to say, and that in contrast to the Hitler analogy, is that you still have elections in Turkey. They're not perfect, and I think the Western media should develop a new narrative about elections in Turkey. They're probably free, they're not rigged in the blatant sense, but they're not fair. So we don't have free and fair elections in Turkey. We have elections where people vote, turnout is very high, people can vote for the opposition, but they're not fair in the sense that the opposition does not have access to a voice in television, in the media. So people don't have access to information, to objective information. We don't have a BBC, we don't have really a way of learning about what's going on in the country. This crony capitalism in the media and this kind of totalitarian worship mood of the leader has elements of, unfortunately, the dark past of Europe, and that's why we're worried about Turkey. Finally, on the question of anti-Americanism, the main driver of anti-Americanism has always been the Kurdish question. There's always this conspiracy theory that the United States is behind the PKK. And we could tell as liberals that this was a conspiracy theory in the 1990s. But now, with the support of the PYD, which is basically the PKK in Syria, many Turks basically no longer look at this as a conspiracy theory. They see it as the reality. And that's why Erdogan thrives on this narrative of the United States having double standards in fighting terrorism. They're using one terrorist organization for fighting another terrorist organization. And that resonates with a large segment of Turkey, which is nationalist. The second driver of anti-Americanism has always been the conspiracy theory that America has a plan to project Turkey as moderate Islam model in the Middle East against the bad Muslims. In other words, Turks are the good Muslims against the Wahhabis, the bad guys. Well, that also drove the secularists into a very anti-American mood because they were angry with the fact that Gülen is in the United States, that Erdogan was embraced by the Bush administration in 2002, even before he became prime minister, and that basically his somewhat a creation of this post-9/11 mood of the West that wants to have a good model out of Turkey. And the Islamists themselves had their own anti-Americanism with the belief that there's a Jewish cabal running America. The neoconservatives are basically a Jewish cabal, and there's a Zionist lobby, and that's basically the very prevalent notion of America. And Erdogan is very pragmatic because when he comes to New York, he visits that very lobby and he basically talks to them. In his last visit, we've seen how pragmatic he can be in dealing with the so-called Israel lobby. But you don't have many friends in Turkey. Anti-Americanism in that sense, resentment against American foreign policy sells in public speeches. But that doesn't mean Turks are anti-American at an individual level. I mean, they look at the applications for green cards. Look where Turks are sending their kids. I mean, it reminds me of the old adage, it's Yankee go home, but take me with you.
Well, we'll have to end the panel on that happy note. Please join me in thanking our panelists, and thank you all for your attention.